G'day everyone, how you doing? My name is Liam. I'm from Aussie Arvos and I've got behind me my trusty GQ Patrol, and I'm going to be doing some driving on the test track here today, talking about some of the stuff I've learned when I've been four-wheel driving, talking about a few different things that apply to all four-wheel driving regardless of where you are, what car you're in, whether you've got a trailer on the back, anything like that. It's all relevant. So anyway, we'll start with a bit about my car. So this is a 1996 Nissan GQ Patrol, a bit of an older thing, a bit of a farm truck, but it gets the job done. Now, these cars are solid axle, meaning they've got a live axle on the front, not independent suspension. This one's coil sprung, both front and rear. And I've got 35-inch mud tyres and all powered by a 4.2 litre turbo diesel engine. Now, that's not entirely relevant to today, but just so you got an idea of what I'm working with here anyway. Now, the first thing I want to talk about when you go four-wheel driving off-road, this should be the first thing on your mind as soon as you leave the blacktop, and that is tyre pressures. Now, I've already aired my tyres down today. Not that it's necessarily 100% essential to get through the track, but it's very good practice. It's going to prolong the life of your tyres. It's going to make it easier to go driving off-road. It's going to prevent you from making, shredding tyres and potentially getting yourself caught in a sticky situation if you're in that kind of position. So, in terms of what I've aired my tyres down to, I've gone on the lower end, about 20 psi roughly, but this varies depending on the driving surface that you're on. For example, you might be just going down dirt corrugated roads, but you might be doing speeds of still in excess of 80 kilometers an hour. And in that instance, say that your road pressure's at 40 psi, even dropping 5 psi out of the tyres can make a huge difference to the handling off-road, while still making it your rolling resistance good to, drive at those speeds, and the car doesn't feel floaty, or you're not going to get bad fuel economy, stuff like that. The next level down, I suppose, from that would be going to like your sort of mid-pressure around 25 psi. This is what you might go for, say, if you were doing some more uneven surfaces where perhaps you needed more grip from the tyre, but you also want to be able to travel at a higher speed if necessary, and then you don't want to, risk running too close to your rim. And then you'd perhaps even go right down into like your teens and lower potentially if you're on something really slick like mud. You need as much footprint as possible, or you're in the sand, and again, as much footprint as possible to make sure you stay above and on top. Now, in terms of, I'm sure you all know this, but while we bag our tyres out, or while we let air out of them, is to let the tyre deflate, and so it can conform better to the surface of whatever you're driving on. And ultimately, it gives you more surface area, which is more friction, which is more grip. And on a side note too, another thing about deflating your tyres, it can make your ride a hell of a lot more comfortable, particularly with corrugations and just bumps in general. You and all the objects in your car going flying around inside the car. So anyway, with that, we know that we've got our tyre pressures set correctly. So we're going to jump in the car and do a few laps of the course. And as we go through, I'm going to talk about different things that I like to do when I'm driving the car to make sure, I make it through in one piece, and so does the car, I guess. And things that I think are just good general practice for when you're driving off-road. So let's jump in. Should have me on the mic. All right, the car started. That's a start. All right. So we're going to start off here. The first thing I want to talk about is the speed at which you drive your four-wheel drive. Now, I suppose before I even take off, a lot of cars will have a low-range system in them. In my case, it's a manual lever through the transfer case, and putting it into low range will lower your gear ratios effectively and make it so you can drive at a much slower pace and with much more control. Now, you want to drive slower in instances where you need control. For example, this first obstacle here, driving up onto the trailer, is something you don't want to have to rush into, because speed can come to, it could end up hurting you if you have to try and hit something too hard, and you might potentially damage the car, or you might lose control and sort of fall off it. So slow is definitely your friend with stuff like this. You can ease up to it, and nice and controlled, slowly up and easy. Now, generally speaking, I'd say your slow sort of driving is for your applications, say whether that be like steep, rocky driving, stuff where control is essential to be able to pick the right line to drive through the obstacle. Now, the obviously alternative to that is fast driving. Fast driving is also applicable in a lot of areas, whether that be in mud or perhaps you're on sand, and you just need that momentum to carry the car through. But this does come at a cost again of control. You don't have as much time to think about where you're putting the car, where the car's ending up. It all happens a lot faster. Again, with this obstacle here coming up to the hill, because of the conditions today, nice and dry, I can stay nice and slow and controlled. I know the car's got plenty of torque just to cruise up in first gear, and nice and happy we're up to the top. Now for downhill, again, I would say there's only very few instances where you'd want to go fast downhill. If you've got the grip, and that's assuming the weather conditions are good, then you want to go as slow as possible to maintain control. So here I can pretty much take my foot off the brake, and that's just riding on the engine braking of the engine, nice controlled descent. Now the only place I would say a fast descent may be necessary is if ever you've experienced a greasy decline. Sometimes if you lose grip, the car wants to run away from you, and your only option is to actually use the momentum and the speed of the tyres to re-straighten yourself as you go downhill. So maybe a possible instance where downhill speed is your friend. Now next, we've got a couple obstacles in front of us, nice and bumpy no doubt. And slow, if you've got the grip again, is ideal. You're going to throw your car around the least, which is great for all your passengers' comfort and all your cargo on board. And you can also be the most controlled in whereabouts you put your tyres. If there's rocks in different positions, or you want to navigate around an obstacle, nice and slow and controlled will let you go around that nice and easy. Now, an alternative to going through obstacles is sometimes you actually will, and I'll loop around here as I talk about it, sometimes you will actually need speed in order to get over an obstacle. Speed in the form of momentum. As we all know, momentum, if you're getting caught up on something, can sometimes help push you through it. Particularly if the conditions are poor. So say, for example, with those logs over there, I think tomorrow we're about to get a pretty good dumping of rain and it might turn a bit greasy. And in that instance, you might have issues where the car doesn't want to climb up and over the object. And that's where you might have to use momentum to help or assist you get over the obstacle. Same with this hill here as well, in fact. Now, in that instance, I wouldn't just say stick your foot as hard as you can on the throttle and go nuts. I think it's beneficial to do a couple of accelerated but still controlled attempts if necessary, so that you can get up and over safely, because after all, that is a lot of the main concern. So in that instance, and when I come over to these logs again, you could hit a lot faster, but as I come up and over, if I hit these logs faster, you'll see that it's going to be a lot bumpier. So we'll do that quickly and everything's going to get shaken around. So definitely not as elegant doing the bumps with all the speed there. But sometimes it is necessary in order to get over whatever you're trying to get across. Now, another thing I do want to talk about, which I think is really important, specifically any car and as well if you have a trailer, is your spatial awareness of your vehicle. And that's knowing where all your four wheels are, knowing where the body of your car is, particularly in an instance like this where if I go either side of this ramp, that's not going to end well for me. So even if you have to, I highly advise just sticking your head out the window and looking down at where your wheels are placed if you've lost track of where your wheels are, or even lost track of which way your wheels are orientated, because obviously the steering wheel can loop around in all different directions. And just making a check, all right, my wheel's lined up with the ramp, and knowing that you're safe to climb up. Because it really is, and once you start getting into some steep stuff, it can be really easy to lose track of where your tyres are. So I try and visualize the track beneath the car and where my wheels are planted on that track. And if you do it correctly, you should be successful. All right. So we've done a couple good laps so far. There you go. Making it look nice and easy, which is I'm happy about. All right. Now, the other thing to think about in terms of not so much space awareness of the car but knowing the limits of not only the car but also yourself. It's inevitable that sometimes you're going to come across something that you think, gee, that looks bloody scary, and it's happened to me quite a lot of times before. And you really have to, depending on the capability of your vehicle, you do have to consider, all right, is this something that I should be driving or I'm confident to drive? I know it can be hard to figure out what the actual capability of your vehicle is because it does change between the driver. So it is a bit of a relationship between you and your car in what you can, or where you can take it. But in saying that, I don't think that you shouldn't have to be ashamed to think, all right, I'm not ready to tackle this object. I don't want to risk doing it yet. So I'm happy to back away and try it another time, or perhaps come back with someone who does have the experience. And there's been plenty of times where I've been out with, doing full driving with people who are experienced, and that's what's given me the confidence to go and drive more difficult tracks. Because yeah, it's definitely something that can be quite intimidating and quite daunting. And sometimes it even still surprises me now what vehicles are actually capable of. All right, so we'll loop back around here. And some of you might be thinking too, and not that I would probably have to use them in this instance, but this car doesn't have differential lockers either, so it's an open front diff, so I'll only get one wheel spinning on the front at the best of times. And it has a limited slip differential in the rear, which does a pretty good job of keeping both the rear wheels turning when I need them to, but not every situation will those tyres keep turning together. Sometimes one will break loose. And that usually becomes apparent on obstacles where it's really off camber. Perhaps there's big holes and such, or the car it's run out of suspension travel, and if one wheel takes too much weight off it, then they'll start to spin separately. So coming back around to the front here, over the logs. All right. And as I mentioned before, hopefully all this, well, not hopefully, but it should, all this stuff I'm talking about applies to when you're towing as well. Obviously, having something on the back is a whole nother ball game when you're off-road. You've got to consider where that is following behind you, because it does take a different path to where your car goes. And actually, that's just reminded me another thought too, when I was talking about tyre pressures to begin with. Definitely want to be airing down your trailer tyres as well, because it follows the exact same principle as your car, in that you're trying to deflate those tyres to give it more surface area to keep it up out of, the sinky stuff, whether that be sand, mud, or even just grip over rocks and such. So deflating your trailer tyres or camper tyres, absolutely essential as well. All right. So you can hear there actually when I'm turning that corner, the LSD of my car wanting to spin the rocks. This one does lock up pretty well, which is good for me. All right. We'll go back over the ramp again. Nice and slow. And I'm going to stop up here and have a look around and check that I'm all good left and right. And again, coming down onto these ramps. Now, assuming you have, you're happy to go out and have a go, you might be thinking, well, what sort of things should I invest in to improve my off-road driving experience? I would say, first and foremost, I think the biggest improvement you can do to just about any car is tyres, for a magnitude of reasons. Obviously, the main one that probably comes to mind is grip. Now, you don't need a mud terrain like I've got. This is really only applicable in far fewer situations than what you'll probably find you come across. For the most part, an all-terrain tyre will give you that extra grip needed and also extra tyre strength needed when you're going on rough terrains. So I have the mud tyres because when I'm doing places, say like the Victorian high country, a bit of wet weather in that place can quickly turn into a whole different sort of driving game. And that's where the extra tread of the mud tyres really helps me out. So in terms of, and again, the same again, 35-inch tyres, unless you want to go drive the hardest rock crawling lines in the world, again, it's really not necessary. I like to do a bit of hard fall driving, so they're suitable for my application, but it really comes down to just picking a tyre that's going to be reliable and strong, and you don't really want to be driving around on your highway terrain off-road because they just don't have the rating and they're not manufactured to do the sort of off-road driving that we take our cars through, particularly in Australia, because we've got a lot of harsh environments that will really test your cars out. I suppose the next thing on from that, beyond tyres is, and well, as I mentioned, I don't have any lockers in this car, but a lot of new four-wheel drives these days actually come with differential lockers. I know a lot of the dual cabs will factory option them in the rear, have a factory rear locker, and just that alone is a huge confidence booster to yourself, as well as a huge improvement to the capability of the car. Having those rear tyres driving at all times, regardless of whether one's in contact with the ground surface, is absolutely massive. And I highly advise you to the rear locker is kind of the one that you can use just about everywhere. You know, like you can be off-road in all sorts of places on the sand, even if your tyres aren't lifting off the ground, and putting the rear locker in will help you immensely. A front locker goes beyond that, and that'll help with once you start tackling steep terrain and perhaps the car's becoming on uneven ground and the front starts to pick up. Having that front locker is going to help to pull you through, making sure that the tyre that is still in contact with the ground is going to drag you through up to the top of the hill or whatever situation you may be stuck in. Now we can go even further beyond that. So you think, all right, I've got the tyres, I've got the lockers. Then you might be running into issues of, oh, well, the bottom seems to catch out a bit. Say if you're going over something with a steep arch over angle perhaps, and the bottom of the car, perhaps the side steps start to scrub. You're probably thinking, well, how am I going to combat that? You can pick the right line perhaps to combat it, but sometimes you just need more clearance, which, hey, maybe you upsized your tyres a bit when you got new tyres and that gave you a little bit of extra clearance. But maybe you kept the same size, you're nice and sensible. And you'll be thinking, well, what else can I do to raise the ground clearance of the car? And obviously a suspension lift is the go. So I think generally in Australia, in Victoria here anyway, lift kits of up to 50 millimeters is acceptable, and that's already a big boost to the capability of your car, just having an extra 50 millimeters of clearance. And not to mention, a lot of these kits give improved handling, improved down travel, which is going to keep your wheels in contact with the road surface far more frequently. Better absorption of like corrugations and bumps. When you're on those steep corrugated roads, you'll find that perhaps your OEM shocks that came in the car can quickly fade, whereas an aftermarket shock that has a larger oil capacity is just going to help that ride maintain smoothness for far longer. You're not going to get that shock fade. Back on the bumpies. And in instances like this too, you'll see here that your shocks are really doing a lot here to absorb the ride, as well as the softness and that extra pressure let out in the tyres. All right. Now, what I want to do actually is loop around and see. It's because the grips, it's so dry today that we've got a lot of grip, and especially when paired with the aired down tyres, there's lots of grip going around. I don't have to worry too much. Make sure I stick my head out the window and line the ramps up nicely here. But I think you'll find in circumstances something as small as those logs over there in the wet, or maybe just slightly bigger, could really make your car. Perhaps you might struggle to get over it if they line up with your wheelbase and you're trying to climb two at once, so the front wheels and the back wheels are trying to climb at the same time. So I'll actually throw it out of four-wheel drive when we come back around here. And I'll have a look. So we'll come down to the bottom. I mean, because I do have the bit of extra rolling diameter in these tyres, it's probably not going to make too much of a difference, but you may find that in a car with smaller tyres, with the poor weather conditions. See there, it takes just a little bit just to get that tyre to push over when the front's not crawling with it as well. All right. So, and the other thing to consider too, that you'll see, oh, don't put it in neutral. On this course, it's not shown as much, but you'll see that on the back of my car, I actually have quite a bit of stuff. Now, at a ballpark estimate of weight, with my whole tray, like it's a full steel tray. I'm actually gonna take a second line up of that, came in a bit tight. Full steel tray, it's an aluminium canopy, but it's got a full fit out inside, made out of timber, which makes it quite heavy. As well as a rooftop tent on top, an awning, I've got a water tank in there, and you can start to see how the weight on the back there adds up very quickly. And that's something that you can definitely feel in the car. I mean, I actually changed the setup of this vehicle from a bare tray to my full sort of touring camping setup quite frequently. And having that extra weight over the rear axles, I can feel it straight away, particularly when you're on an incline or on bumps. You get a lot more body roll, the car wants to jump around at the back, the front wheels want to pick up. So thinking about when you're putting accessories on your car, thinking about where your weight is positioned in your car is actually really important, because it can greatly affect how your car behaves off-road. And I know there's been many instances before, particularly since putting this extra weight on the back of the car, where I've felt that the car didn't quite handle exactly how I wanted it to because of all the increased weight towards the back. It effectively takes grip off of your front wheels when you have heaps of weight on the back of the car. Because if you think about it, all that weight's being shifted back on a hill, the front wheels haven't got the weight to keep pulling you over. So that's another thing to consider as well. And if you've got a trailer on the back and you've got all that tow ball weight as well, that's another thing that's going to be sort of weighing down the back of the car. All right. And back to the start. Oh, a young fella wants me to give it a rev. No, I don't condone that. All right. All right. Oh, the door's playing up. So, there's a few loops around the car anyway, all around the track. And as you can see, this car, it does have the capability to do this track sort of pretty well. I haven't actually, funnily enough, being at a caravan and camping show, I've never actually towed with this car, which is quite, I think quite funny, but I'll be definitely keen to do some. But I'm sure that I'll just be applying all the basic principles that I know of when I actually go to tow off-road. All the thing about just keeping controlled and slow and not sort of, getting too excited and driving up anything that, might be silly otherwise. But I suppose another thing with that too is because this car is an older car, it doesn't have a lot of the sort of features and accessories that will assist you in off-road towing. Like this car doesn't have an electric brake controller. I'd have to get one fitted. I'd just be relying on the old mechanical brakes. And the brakes in this thing aren't even that crash hot to begin with anyway. So yeah, it'd be interesting to go and tow with it. But I think it would be able to do it. It probably being a bit heavier. Obviously, the heavier your car is, sort of the better it will tow a heavy trailer. Like if you have a really light car and you try and tow a big trailer, then you've got more force acting against you. You're going both uphill and downhill. You're trying to pull something bigger. But I think this would probably do all right. But how are we going for time? Oh, just about there. Does anyone, to the few of you watching, does anyone have any questions about the car out of curiosity? Pretty much what you see, what you get. What's that, sorry? Yeah, it's a Nissan Patrol GQ. Yeah, so a 96 model. It does often get confused for a 79 series, which I can understand. This one's better though. Does it have a turbo? So I have fitted a turbo to this car. It comes naturally aspirated, but I decided that I didn't like doing 80 kilometers on the freeway all the time, so I put a little turbo on it just to help it along. What's that? Yeah, it is. It's a 4.2 litre. So it's quite a large displacement, but you'd be surprised. And look, it's got the torque particularly, and I honestly cannot, even when it was naturally aspirated, I could not fault the power when it was in low range. Being obviously big displacement and diesel making all of their power in the low rev range, it's really good for all that slow stuff going up hills. Never struggled, but it was when I got out on the open freeway and I was trying to compete with people with campers and such and trying to stay ahead. It just couldn't keep up. How am I enjoying the rooftop tent? Well, that's different as well. I'm not sure. There's probably a few rooftop tents getting around here today. I've only had this rooftop tent on for about a month. I've probably slept in it maybe I've probably done about 2 weeks in it total. But yeah, I do love it. I think it's a great way to, if you want to keep the capability of the car at its maximum, and particularly if you're a bit more of a nomadic camper, like I find myself going from night to night in a different spot, it's a great way to easily be able to set up and pack up without the hassle of rolling out a wet, dirty swag or whatever it may be. So I really enjoy the rooftop tent. Perhaps, one day maybe I might need a few more seats, and then also might need a few more places to sleep people as well. And in that case, I definitely wouldn't be opposed to one of the sort of light little off-road campers. I think they look like a real awesome setup, something that can carry everything, but also still capable. Yeah, I'm sure they are a bit of work. The more accessories you get, the more work it is off-road, I guess, anyway. It's always the way. But yeah, anyway, I reckon that's about enough yapping from me, but I hope you all learned something. Yeah, it's just what I've learned. Like, I'm sure those of you out there probably have years more experience than I do. I'm only a young fella. But yeah, I feel like the few little things that I've learned to begin with are really good starting points, like with the tyre pressures and just being slow and controlled, and not overstepping your boundaries, just making sure you're comfortable, because at the end of the day, off-roading like this is meant to be fun. No one wants to have a stressful time. So yeah, that's all from me. Thanks everyone for coming and listening and having a watch. And yeah, I'm actually going to be on the RV Master Stage at 1:30. So if you want to come and listen to me talk about some more camping related stuff, I'll be over there. But thanks everyone for coming and watching.